Welcome to Bonn Park. I'm Sara Geidlinger.
And I'm Marshall Ward.
My name is Vincent Marconi, and I'm a visual artist and musician with the band Johnny Hollow with Janine White.
I'm Janine White, and I'm in Johnny Hollow with Vincent, and we do a podcast called Strange Muses.
Which I am a huge fan of.
Me too.
Thank you. You guys have been inspiring for us. So this is great to hear.
Inspiring
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, we've been listening to you for a while.
Gosh, guys. End of show.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 We've got big news
Do we ever? We have a brand new website.
and so many amazing things to check out on it.
BonnPark.com.
BonnPark.com. What can we find there?
You can listen to our episodes right on the site.
You can check out the Bonn Park community blog.
You can find out how you can partner with us.
Oh, and the shopping. We have so much fun merchandise.
I'm going to buy myself the I'm the Marshall Ward tote.
Me too.
BonnPark.com. Check us out.
The idea of the Muse goes far back in history. Especially well known is their presence in ancient Greek mythology, as the goddesses who inspired literature, art, music, and even science. But what about their nemesis? Presuming that the struggle for inspiration is not a modern phenomenon, was there anything in folklore that suggested this idea of an anti-muse? We figured there had to be.
In Ireland, there is an old tale that refers to something called the fairy wind. It's known more for its sound than its appearance. Apparently, it had the hum and drone that was reminiscent of a spectral beehive that had a low, menacing pitch. If you heard it, you knew it was coming. Its appearance, however, was invisible. Think of one of those mini tornadoes that you see sometimes in parking lots that carries candy wrappers and empty plastic bags into its swirling current. Well, apparently, in Ireland, farmers were extremely cautious not to cross one of these mini tornadoes. They would often appear in their flat fields. If you were knocked by one, you could become possessed. You could become sick. The purpose of the fairy wind was to move a large host by fairies, which could perhaps be a human or a changeling, from one place to the next, and you did not want to get in its way. There are stories of men and women becoming catatonic after being knocked by one, where only a brutal exorcism could possibly bring them back. There was one detail that I found very interesting. Sometimes the fairy wind would target artists and musicians, and if they were knocked by one, they would lose their talent. They would no longer paint, they would no longer play, they would no longer sing.
That's amazing. I can't believe that you found something that is so apt, like such a perfect metaphor. It's this whirlwind. It knocks you over and you become catatonic. I know what that feels like.
Yeah, and then when I was going through it and I found the detail that it targets artists and musicians, and they just lose their talent. They don't become possessed or sick. They just lose their abilities. That hit me. Like, wow, that's...
I'm going to do that from now on, because that is like, that feels...
What are you going to do?
I'm going to have like days when I have my talent and days when I don't. Because that feels like it really makes sense. Like, maybe it's true. Like, sorry, I can't today. I don't have my talent.
Marshall and I had the joy and privilege of reviewing your show before the public got to hear it, just an episode. And from the responses that we gave you, home run, delicious listen, can't get enough of it. Marshall and I have actually gone back and re-listened to it now that it's out, like a few times.
Oh, thank you.
So to me, it's like Strange Muses is like a beautiful radio show. I know I've used this word a few times. It's delicious to me. I don't know if it's because you're also musicians. And I know, Janine, you do all the tech and audio stuff, so I really want to geek out on that as well. But like the cadence of your voices and the sounds of your stories mixed with the interviews and the music and then the use of language. Big lover of language. And I think there's a lot of intent around how you guys are building this show. It's not like Marshall and I plug everything in and we're like, hey, you guys want to talk about what you do? Like waka waka. It's like there's like some thought put into this show that you're making, and we want to hear more about it.
Well, thank you, but it's a little bit like apples and oranges when you compare your show to ours. It's not like a chat show. And Janine, you take a lot of time, putting all the different elements together when we're composing it. So it's a different beast, I think.
Yeah, the writing is probably it's one of the most interesting parts, but it's sort of collecting all these pieces and then finding a way to string a story together and get from one point to another and make it a fun ride. I don't know exactly.
That's the hardest
It's a fun
part,
ride.
is like finding the arc, because we usually have a preconceived notion of where that arc is going to go. And whenever we fight it and try to make that arc go, it never works. So collecting the pieces and then learning from like the interviews or letting go of any preconceived notions and then going on a new journey with the material has been really a learning experience for us.
None of them turned out the way they were planned in the beginning.
Yeah.
They kind of took their own direction.
I kind of love that. And we have a similar story there where Marshall and I started doing this because we're buddies and we like to talk. And I was really into podcasts. We're like, this will be funny and hilarious. So our first episodes are very different than what we're making now. It took on its own life without our direction necessarily. It just kind of happened.
How long have you guys known each other for? I've asked before, but it's been a long time, correct?
Long time.
I can't really pinpoint it. What I do is I kind of measure
Like the age of our
the
kids.
age of our kids.
Because we met at the park with the kids.
So if mine are 20 and 16, and Sarah's are
14 and 16.
Yeah.
Yeah. About that long.
about that long.
You guys met at the park with your kids?
Yeah, we
At
met
Bonn Park.
Bonn Park, which is down the street.
Oh,
Yeah.
is that where you got the title
Yeah.
came from? That's so great. I didn't know that.
And what was great was when I was a full-time stay-at-home dad for 8 years, and I think I thought I was going to meet lots of really fun stay-at-home parents and stuff, and I didn't.
I'm right here.
Yeah.
Hello.
No, it was either maybe it might have been grandparents or caregivers often.
Yeah.
And the stay-at-home dad role was not as prominent as
Well,
it is now.
I never met another stay-at-home dad
at that time.
at that time.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm
and
sure.
and then sometimes if I was in a park, I just naturally I felt like a bit of an outsider if there were some women standing around talking and stuff like that. But in the case of Sara and a few other moms, I used to think of it like kind of like a beacon of hope. Like when I would see them at the park, I'd be like, oh, there's some adult conversation happening that I can, I would get energy from, and I would take that energy and it would stay with me for a long time, because you can feel a lot of isolation as a stay-at-home parent.
Oh, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
And we sort of lost touch and reconnected over the years too. Like just because you don't go to the park sometimes, your kids get older,
Yeah.
etc. And then Steve got to meet you.
Right.
I was working in our one bedroom as an office at the old house, which
Yeah.
I could see the park from my house. And I was looking out the window and I'm like, that's strange. A giant pack of teenagers just ran over the hill
Yeah.
really fast.
Yeah,
And then 2 seconds later, Marshall, you get back here, you little.
What were they doing?
They had spent 8 months ringing my doorbell at midnight, 1 in the morning, 2 in the
Doorbell
morning.
ditching, Nikki Nine Door. I don't know what everyone else calls it.
Yeah, just basically harassing my family.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
man.
then I confronted them one day.
I yelled to Steve, Marshall is coming up the hill. He's a good man. Go help him. Because
Yeah.
I couldn't decipher what was happening.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's been a fun.
Yeah, and I think you can tell the chemistry. Like
Yeah.
we've been knowing each other for, oh my God, like 20 years
yeah.
plus.
I
think
So when you know somebody, that's part of half the battle when you're having a conversation is like you can rely, you've got that trust on your partner to be able to tell you if you're doing bad or pick it up or take over from when you're,
Or maybe
you're
I'll
lost
ask
for
you this,
words.
because I think one of the things I value most about working with Sara is she's capable of showing me things about myself that I either didn't see or I didn't really know how to articulate.
Janine's laughing.
Preparing my answer for this.
and or consider. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Might be something like. Well, I won't go into the explanation, but Sara can see that I don't look too far ahead ever, right? And she said maybe it's because of this and this reason, and she's talking about events in my childhood, kind of thing. And when somebody kind of points that out to you, you learn something about yourself.
Yeah, that's...
And then you move forward with a better understanding of why you do that.
I wish I had a Sara in my life. Janine makes me a worse person.
No, I was just going to say, he learns a lot from me.
You knew I was going there, right?
Oh, I know. We were like, who's going to beat who to the punch there?
Well, tell us, because your working relationship is similar. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, how did you meet? How did this come together?
We met when we were both in school. He was at Waterloo and I was at Wilfrid Laurier. And I think just our circle of friends overlapped. And we noticed each other because I was doing weird music and he was doing weird art. And I think that's really where we started to get to know each other, was that everybody was hanging out, but we started like putting our talents together already. At that point, the internet was just starting to be a place where you could really do a lot in terms of like designing really interesting websites. So we were experimenting with that together, and then we just never...
Well, also delivering music to people without involving a record label. That really excited us too. You could like publish and just put it out there, design it, master it, mix it any way you wanted without a middleman at that time.
Yeah.
And that was really exciting.
Johnny Hollow, like in the band formation of us, started back then when with Kitty Thompson, who is the cello player. She still contributes now, but she lives in Banff, I believe. Yeah.
Well, I had I wanted to put my work up online, so I was one of the first adapters, and I had talented friends around me to use Flash as a software, which meant you could actually animate and do really interesting things with sound on a website, which you can't really do it as easily as you could back then. So I went to Janine for sound design. And I didn't want to use anything that sounded like a beep or any typical type of Foley that you would find online. I wanted something really strange. And I knew who I wanted right away. And Janine was happy to do things.
Because I wasn't capable of the regular stuff anyways. At that point, like I was studying classical music, and I was doing electroacoustics and stuff in university, but it was very, very, artsy, weird. So I didn't know how to do a lot of stuff. So everything I did came out strange.
My first request to Janine is, can you make scarecrows moan? And she's like, yep. And that was the first thing.
What does that sound like?
I could, well, I'm not going to do it. I can't, but I actually still have the sound effects, which is great.
I haven't looked at those for a long time.
Amazing.
So, and that was one of the things that really captured people, was the sound design of the site. And then we decided, it's a long story, so I'll just pack it a little bit shorter. We decided to do music together, and we put a couple of like tracks in a section that we called Sonic Skeleton, and they were downloaded like crazy. Like it was really kind of invigorating to see people, strangers that we didn't know all over the world, take these. And we thought, well, maybe we should do more. And that's how Johnny Hollow was formed, the abridged version anyway.
And we did our riddle site, and that's where at least our underground presence started there. We had riddles people could crack and get free music. And so we were using, everything we had to throw onto the free internet just to try to get noticed.
Yeah, it was like a crazy jukebox full of pinned moths. And if you answered, and it's still a bit, actually, if you go on Johnny Hollow, we just put it up a few months ago again.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. And you can really hear the sound design in that as well. So if you go there, you can get all the like prizes and whatnot by typing in the answers to the riddles. And it's like a crazy jukebox, basically.
I want to talk about the podcast more again as well, because this is our space and where we live. I just re-listened to the episode. I think it was because I just re-listened to the 666 Shades of Grey. And then this morning I listened to the superhero one again on my walk this morning. And I just want to relate. There's this beautiful moment where Janine opens up the episode talking about a superhero moment in the store. Love, love, love this. And I just wanted to tell you about
a relative superhero moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, you saved a kid. You saved one of your kids. And this story is, I don't want to ruin it for anybody if you want to go to it, but basically, a near crash in the store, a shopping cart going over, and at the last minute, saving your child's head from impending doom, right? I just want to tell this story about how people reacted applauding for you in this moment, because that is so powerful. I was once in a big box store with my husband and my two kids when they were super little. And me and Steve were like very engrossed in whatever was on the shelf that was so important that we were talking about buying. And I just hear this older couple like tisk behind us, like, oh. I was like, what is that? And I turn around, instead of helping, my younger daughter was falling out of the cart, and my older daughter had one of those clear plastic bags cinched around her neck, and she was going, oh my God. And I was like, could somebody have alerted me to this disaster that is happening in live, like real time?
And they just said you had someone going like,
yeah. So like not a superhero moment for me as a parent at all. But I love that you had this moment.
Well, they survived.
They're fine. They survived. I kept these kids alive, knock on wood.
I think when your kids are really little, like we all have some somewhat superhero moments. Otherwise, they would be dead.
They would be.
Like, that's the truth. You
Isn't
save their lives all the time.
Oh, I know.
Have you ever felt like a superhero? Even just for a moment? Just a tiny little moment in which you surprised yourself by doing just the right thing just in time? I'll give you an example of one of my very modest superhero moments. I was on a camping trip a couple of summers ago, and we needed some supplies. So I had driven to the nearest little town store with my 1.5-year-old son. This was the kind of small North Ontario variety store that has a limited selection of just about everything you might need, at prices you just do not question because they're the only thing nearby, and they also sell alcohol. And after a week of corralling kids in the wild, we deserved a beer that night. I grabbed one of the 2 steel carts they had available. The mini mart kind, smaller and narrower than the ones in regular grocery stores. My son was having none of getting into the seats, so he walked alongside me as we browsed. We got our stuff and joined the line at the cash register. When it came to my turn, I started putting our things on the counter. Popcorn, bread, bag of apples. As I'm doing this, I hadn't noticed that behind me, my son had started to climb the far side of the cart. A case of beer was weighing down the side he was grabbing onto, and the cart began to tip. This all happened in the flash of a second. I reached behind me with my right arm, pulling up the cart just as it gave into gravity with my son hanging off the side, then twisted myself around the cart to catch him with my left arm just before the back of his head hit the concrete floor with the cart and its contents on top of him. I breathed. The lineup behind me broke into a little clap. "You've got eyes on the back of your head," one man said to me, and I felt like a bit of a superhero. Did I do that? I'm not known for my reflexes. In fact, I'm better known for being a little towards the clumsy side. Just ask my friends and family. But that move, that was impressive. I tell this story more often than I like to admit because, well, I saved the day, maternal instinct and all. I'm also the one who weighed down one side of a tippy cart with beer and wasn't exactly keeping the best eye on the toddler, but let's focus on the hero part. Here's the question. Do we all have the instinct to be superheroes when the moment is right? I think most of us do. We just rarely get the chance. The other, more troubling question is this. When the personal stakes aren't so high, when the moment doesn't feel so real and immediate, where does that instinct go? Are the superhero saviors we dream up in our fiction aspirational figures? Or just an attractive complement to our own complacency? Why do we spend so much time imagining superheroes? Welcome to Strange Muses. My name is Janine White.
And I'm Vincent Marconi.
We're longtime collaborators on a variety of creative projects, most notably our musical group, Johnny Hollow.
In the decades we've been working together, we've spent a lot of time just talking on the phone, long conversations about the weird things we encounter as we shape our ideas.
This podcast is about some of the strange stories that have stuck with us, like peculiar friends, throughout the years.
Today, we're going to talk about superheroes.
Well, let's talk about that episode in particular. If you guys want to, can we dive into that one and talk about sort of the places that you went and the inception behind the superhero idea of that episode?
Yeah, we wanted to kind of like explore. First off, we have a song called Superhero, and for years it did really well for us. And so we thought we'd kind of unpack it, why we even bothered to write about the archetype of a superhero. And so I have a friend that his name is Phil Jimenez, and we thought it would be interesting to interview him. And Phil is a very famous comic book artist for both Marvel and DC. And to ask him, he gets asked all these questions, and I wanted to kind of really go back and ask some really stupid questions, because there's often somebody like him is asked very like inside question, very thoughtful questions that only people in that universe would really know. But I wanted to ask some like really basic questions that only a comic book artist could kind of really, relate to the lore of comic books to an audience that other people might not, have a doorway into, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally.
So that was really fun. The interview is actually quite a bit longer than what we used. And
can I interject for 1 second?
Please.
Another thing that I thought was really interesting about him, and that I think was maybe an intention overall, was just that kind of showing how someone who draws comic book characters for a living, the depth of thought that he gives to his topics, and how he thinks in such a big, wide way about, the deeper meaning of what he's doing. I don't think a lot of people realize that about a lot of artists in general, but maybe especially ones that are sort of like in the comic book universe.
He sounds like a professor when he's speaking specifically of, like, he did a lot of the Wonder Woman comic books. And so when he's like, he was talking for a while about, I don't even know if it made the episode, but like the clay art that he would like study from Greek islands, from Greece, I should say, and use that as a backdrop for some of the panels, and the amount of thought that went into why he chose these specific silhouettes was really interesting. And it shows you how far he goes into that rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite genres of comics are the 1950s horror comics. And I think I love them for the same reason I love the old Twilight Zone, which is a lot of those stories are little morality kind of plays of the person who's up to something that's hurtful and harmful to others is going to get it in the end.
Very much like a fairy tale, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that there's some beautiful folklore and fairy tale telling stories in Strange Muses, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
we talk about a fairy tale called Janine. We go through the Wild Hunt, which is more of a myth than a fairy tale, but we kind of approach it as if it was one.
Yeah. The stories like that, I think, have just appeared frequently in our catalog of sort of, inspiration for stuff. We both love stories, and we love characters, and I think they, when they're in your head, they wiggle around, and they have something to do with creative things that come out of them.
It's also interesting to find ones that you and I both have this in common. We like fairy tales and myths and folklore that involve characters and archetypes that people may not have heard of before. And we often, I do for my art and music, and I know you do for music as well, look for that as like fodder to inspire and spark an idea.
And I like them because they don't always have happy endings too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
The more open-ended, the better, I think. And that one in particular, the Cunning Ileana too. Just as a little background on that, the last EP that we made we had kind of decided to have a theme, and that was going to be folklore or stories, you know what I like, part fabric of mythology, whatever. But we did want to kind of find things that that we could relate to people we knew who lived around us. So we actually were looking at the demographics in Waterloo region and going, well, you know what, there's a huge Romanian community that we didn't realize was here. Let's find a Romanian story. And then you had this amazing friend of yours, Doinitsa, who grew up in Romania, and we can, you know, tie all of these things together and get a little bit of a flavor of something that, you know, is in our backyard that we didn't even know was there. So we do a lot.
And that's what's so fun about that episode is hearing a different voice come in, you know, into it.
Yeah.
Especially her voice.
Yes.
She's got like this kind of elegant presence, but she's a combination of a poet and a surly sailor. Like she can swear with which is apparently there's actually someone had told me before that there's a competition in Romania for like the most interesting creative ways to put somebody down or swear.
I would totally crush that.
And knowing Doinitsa, there'd be I buy that completely. But she also has this really like poetic way of putting things too. And you mentioned something, this is more of a technical thing, that when we go through our interviews, me especially, but also some of our guests, Janine's cutting out the ums and the ahs and the likes. And
where you can't always do it because it's
Yeah.
connected to the word, right?
Yeah. And you only want to take it out when it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. But Doinitsa doesn't have that. She's a little shy with her English-speaking abilities, and you'd commented before.
Oh, that's true. I remember. Yeah, I was like, wow. Like, I didn't have to edit her at all. That's just how she talks.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It so happens that Vincent has a Romanian friend, and we were wondering if she had heard of this tale when she was growing up. And it turns out she hadn't. Like, it really is pretty obscure. But it was remarkable. We talked to her about like being a young lady in Romania. And, well, I think let's just play a clip of our conversation.
Yeah, let's do that, because we didn't expect this.
I love my passions. Passions about food, passion for a glass of wine, passion about a man, passion about, I don't know, I'm passionate. I do everything with passion. I love my feelings. I love my emotions. So I learn to try to take a breath before I react, but I react anyway sometimes.
It's a very short breath sometimes.
It is a very short breath.
This is my dear friend Doinitsa. She grew up in Romania, where this fairy tale originated. I recorded a chat with her when we were researching Ileana because, I swear to God, her personality has such fiery femininity. She seems like a real-life, modern-day Ileana to me. She told me a story about what it was like growing up in a strict patriarchal household in Romania.
My sister had a kind of boyfriend. I went to buy bread, and I just saw the guy walking down the street, and we walked together for 10 steps, and my dad saw me. So I got home, my dad came behind me, opened the door, and he smacked me on my face. And I was, what are you doing? Why is it? You don't walk with men on the street. You are young. You are my daughter. You don't blah, 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 blah. And that it is not only in my family, but every other family. My confidence comes from knowing who I am. I am a strong, passionate woman. So I love much and I hate much. Our time on this earth is very important, so I try to not dwell on negative feelings. But still inside of me, I boil inside when somebody upsets me. I am like a lion.
like a real-life Ilyana. That fierceness that came out at the end, I feel like she taps into something deep.
Yeah, what's remarkable about Doinitsa is that she can be completely vulnerable and powerful at the same time.
Yeah.
And that little bit of recording, what haunts me is that bit about her father. It brings me back to the heart of Ilyana's tale, and that is really her only job was laid out by her father, who just wanted her to stay pure, and her sisters as well. Meanwhile, what she had done in her adventures was mimic a priest, mimic a witch, toss her would-be lover into knives, doing all these things with such courage and moxie. She really is much more of an interesting person than just, protecting her purity.
Do you find that sometimes when you look at episodes you've made, you realize that podcasting is the perfect medium for that story you want to tell? And I'll give you a good example of where I see it with us. Is we did a series on the St. Jacobs Farmers Market. If we tried to approach that as a documentary film with cameras, a lot of those people would never have talked to us. A lot of them say it's just audio, right?
Yeah.
We go, yeah, okay, now we've got their story, right?
We had a conversation with one woman who said, like, how much can you tell this is me, because I don't want to get in trouble at my church? You know?
Oh,
Like,
wow.
No photos. So I realized the St. Jacobs Farmers Market story, the perfect medium to tell that was podcasting. On the other
So
hand,
how long ago was that episode? Sorry.
Last
summer.
It was last summer.
Yep.
It was last summer.
over
I'm gonna-
3
parts.
I gotta look for that.
And then
I
having
haven't
said
listened
that,
to it,
Sarah's currently working on a film about vintage toys, nostalgia, mental health. I don't know how it all ties together. That has to be told visually.
right.
There's more
Yeah.
at stake when you're visual or your image is attached to
We
the audio,
have to
right?
see those toys.
Yeah.
There's going to be moments in that film, I imagine, where there isn't even speaking at times. There's just an image of a toy, and it's going to evoke and tug your heart and awaken all sorts of feelings, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as I set that up, I guess what I'm saying is there must be times where you think about Strange Muses and you think, this is the perfect medium
Yes.
for telling this story or for having this conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons is people, when they get into a podcast and they're more invested and are willing to there's a ritual like turning it on, listening. They're not like we're so addicted to like Instagram and television. You're flipping from one thing to the next, but when you're listening to a podcast, you're often like kind of settling into an entire story being revealed to you. So we have an opportunity as podcasters to put a story together.
Yeah, I think it's really blown up, as we all know, for the past few years. I think the pandemic did a lot to encourage people to get into it. There's so many people I know who are like 3 years ago were like, what's a podcast? And are now like, oh yeah, they've got their whole library, sending each other suggestions.
People often ask Marshall and I, are you still blogging to Facebook? Like,
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. Yes.
That's right.
Also, there is, just going back to what you were saying before, Marshall, there is something, people are more willing to reveal things if they're not on camera.
Us
So that's
included.
an opportunity
For sure.
Yeah.
to tell a more intimate story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about the She Is Your Neighbor podcast.
It's a good
by
show.
Women's Crisis Center, Florida region, and how that's a perfect example of if you're trying to tell a story about an arduous and difficult and challenging and abusive time in your life,
Oh,
those guests must feel much, much safer and better telling it over
yeah.
into a microphone rather
I
than being
bet.
filmed. In fact, I imagine most of them just wouldn't be filmed,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even the presence of the camera, like even when we talk to each other, I think we told you about that we couldn't do it not awkwardly until we got ourselves like on the phone.
Yeah, so let's
No
talk about that.
faces.
Yeah,
You did it over
because
the phone.
your phone is your relationship, right? You guys call each other.
Totally. And
Yeah,
then it was like,
let's talk about
oh
that.
yeah, that's how we talk together.
We, well, I don't know how to start this, but we were very clumsy at the beginning, and we tried a bunch of things when we were talking to each other. We were scripting things out. It felt very stilted.
Us
Well,
too.
first we tried to do it unscripted,
Yeah.
and then it would take us like an hour and a half to do something
That's a lot of
that
editing.
should have happened in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so we tried scripting it, and then we sounded like we were acting.
And then we went to the studio
in the same
together.
room. Then
That was weird
then
because we were like, eye contact, what is happening? And
this was like still after like the pandemic era, nobody was used to being in the same room together either. Anyways, so yeah.
So then we decided, hey, why don't we just get on the phone and we'll record ourselves while we're on the phone with our computers. And that's when we kind of like felt our groove.
Yeah.
And
not that it was perfect, but it was a hell of a lot easier.
We know it was working just because of the lack of editing. Like there was way too much before. And so the amount of editing was way less when we were just having conversations on the phone. It was actually manageable.
Yeah.
This is where I want to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add to that. You could take big chunks that just flowed naturally as opposed to having to like try to splice out.
Yeah, create something that never happened, like a fake news.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what I want to geek out with you about, Janine, is so when you try to do it just on the fly, when you're just starting out, it's a lot of like, wow, this is garbage. Let's cut this out. Let's cut that out. What can I cobble together to make something cohesive here? When you try and script it, it's a lot of takes. And you're like, where do we sound less stupid? You know, put these things together. But then once you find that groove somehow, for Marshall and I, it is that he likes to look out the window. That's why we have spots. And that I like to like be here looking at everyone that's in the table, right? So like that works for us. And we found a groove in that as well. But it's only come with time. So, Janine, what I really liked about your show is that you've put some audio elements into that phone conversation to transition from one piece to the next piece. And this is where I'm like, I've said to Marshall, what have we been doing? Our show should be like their show. And he's like, that's not what we do. I'm like, but it sounds cooler. You know, like, they're doing it right, but we have a thing that works for us, right? And we have other avenues we can try that in. But you're doing, there's sometimes some crackling that makes it sound like you're maybe a little bit old timey. There's sometimes some music that overlaps to bring you there. Sometimes, I don't know what you really call this because I'm not really a pro, but like, in music, it'd be where the beat drops, right? Like you bring it from muted to clarity. Like, can we talk about how you create that?
I in my head, I call it choreography because that's what it feels like. Like there's no science to it. It's like you feel a natural flow. When you feel like you don't almost really notice what's going on, I think that's when you know it's right. For me, it feels like there's a rhythm that's going through the whole thing that you're just kind of landing on, that's carrying it properly. And I can tell when it's wrong and it needs something to fix it or smooth it over. That's probably the most, the most clear I can be about that. 'Cause it's not really.
We also wanted to signal the audience when something was happening. I'm glad you actually pointed it out because it was a lot of to get from one point to another point, we were wrestling with how to do that. The sounds that you created were where we landed, and it ended up being a lot of work to get there. So when you acknowledging it, because we don't think that people actually even hear that.
Oh, I hear it.
But at the end, for example, there's a really soft sound of a moth, and then Janine comes in and kind of does her conclusion or her thought for the whole episode. Just figuring that out was probably hours of conversation.
Well, in some ways, I think to me that was always the fun part that I looked forward to. That would probably be the easiest and take the least time because creating the story is the hardest part.
Right.
Honestly,
I think I was just waiting though, perhaps to hear that polish.
Yeah.
Well, there's a music. Sorry, are you good?
Yeah.
Or are we good?
We're good.
There's a musicality to it when you're putting it together where this must be part of what you're a musician, Janine.
Yeah.
First and foremost. So, and were you already into recording and sound design before this podcast, with Johnny Hollow, and then applying those skills here?
Yeah. I've actually done quite a bit of sound design in short films and interactive things online
for the National Film Board.
Yeah.
Right
now
right.
I'm actually an audio podcaster for another podcast that's going on CBC. So that is kind of my milieu. The rest of it was what was really, really new to me. Although I'd never done it in the podcasting, in that particular medium, I just loved it because it made it even more important, even a bigger part of the fabric of what was happening when you're only listening. It was kind of There's something a little, and when you're doing sound design, like I said this before, so it'll be repetitive, but especially when it comes to like, say, film, you're not even supposed to notice the sound design. Right. You know what I mean? And there's an art to that, and it's satisfying in its own way. But there's something about podcasting, if you're using it as part of the storytelling, that just gives it like I don't know. I think it's rewarding. It gets a bit of a bigger role.
It actually
it
helped us too. Like we were talking about before about being on the phone. So an example of one of the little details, when Janine and I come in, right at the top when we're talking to each other, there's kind of a phone effect, a bit of a crackle, and then it fades away because you don't want to linger there too long. But that's one of the details that lets the audience know that, okay, we're going to chat for a little while. And I think there's when you're signaling the audience of what's about to happen, they're comfortable, they know where they're going, they can kind of if you repeat that from one podcast to the next, they're invested.
Yes.
But there's a lot of experimentation too, because I remember when we thought of trying that, we both were like, that might, like, it just as easily could have sounded really tacky and totally not worked, and then we would have thrown it out. But it just was that little hint of something that
less
takes
is
you
more.
from one. Yeah, less is more. But yeah, I think experimenting with things like that, where they can sort of they can unexpectedly work, or they can completely not. It's pretty fun to try out different things like that.
We're going to take a moment to hear from this episode's sponsor.
Ever wondered what happens inside a black hole?
Or what quantum mechanics tells us about reality?
Curious about how the universe began or how it will end?
Feed your curiosity with Conversations at the Perimeter, a science podcast from Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics.
On each episode, we chat with a different scientist about the grandest questions in the universe, from the quantum to the cosmos.
Geek out to Conversations at the Perimeter, wherever you get your podcasts.
And now back to the show.
My question for Vincent is, something that's not lost on me is the fact that, so Sara has listened to what must be thousands of hours of my voice now, right? Mm-hmm. And I have given that of myself to her to edit, right?
I actually want to make him t-shirts that have the sound wave, the audio wave of him saying, and,
yeah.
you know what it looks like.
So, people use the word intimacy when they talk about podcasting, but there's another level of intimacy that's happening when people are working together and the person editing is listening endlessly to your voice and editing, like you're getting to know somebody incredibly well that you don't get to know your friends or your partner even. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this is another level of I would say intimacy and vulnerability. And you're and I'm okay with it, and you must be okay with it too.
Yeah, I am okay with it. There's definitely trust to Janine because we've been working again for years. I mean, she's dealt with my vocals and some songs and whatnot. So that is even for me anyway more terrifying.
It was tempting. So every time I wanted to cobble together something that was really misrepresentative of him and just send it to him and see how he reacted. But then I'm like, no, that's a lot of work for a 5-second joke. You know?
Let's be honest. I'm really good with Photoshop, so there would be retribution.
I know. Yeah. That's true.
It's on. The wars are on, everybody.
So I feel like it's more of a fear than. But yeah, there is a trust factor, and when you know that person's gonna make you sound better, there's a comfort in that too.
Yeah, I guess what I mean is Sara can hear my limitations because she's editing. You know what I mean? So she will hear me say the same because we all have parameters, right? We have ways we phrase things and the way we ask questions. And anyways, I think that's a very an intimate way to know somebody.
I think
it fully let them kind of like, here, take my voice. You know what I mean? And
for me, it
goes both ways too. Sorry, if I could just add to that because Vince, I don't have to worry about his ego at all. Like that's been really clear from the beginning. It's been like edit whatever. I'm never worried that he's going to be like, well, that part that I did really, I thought I did really great, or vice versa. That there was we both wanted the best end product. And so I think that's a really big part of the give and take, is just, you're always having to make choices, editorial choices, and we would make a lot of the choices together. But I think one of our, and you're probably very familiar with this, is like, you know, is this adding anything to it, that anything to our story, and would it be fine without it? And you get really good at tossing things out, right? And
and when you're both like you guys, when you're both, if the podcast sucks, you're both lost.
Yeah.
Right. So we both have the same to lose. So there's no, but you know what? Going
it's a
back
lot
to
easier to edit someone when you know they're not going to like give you grief about, you know.
But when I feel more vulnerable, or actually, I guess vulnerable would be the right word, when I'm interviewing somebody, because it takes me a while to get to the questions sometimes. I'm a little bit more nervous, even when it's a friend of mine that I know, because I want to make sure that they get something out of the interview. And I know that you guys are invested in this too. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like the same interview over and over. So I put as much work as I can into it, but you can't over prepare for that either. So that's where I really have a leap of faith with when Janine gets that interview and then shortens it to something more palpable for the audience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I could not agree more about that. I think for us, and Marshall, I believe that you're going to agree with this, the way that we've made interviewing work for us is allowing us the long form.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys always interview together?
Always. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Because we started 3 years ago next week.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
3 years ago next week. We had recorded 6 months of episodes before the pandemic hit here. So we could just pump those out and then until it was safe to meet again. So that really helped us out. But yeah, we've never had to do it separately or over Zoom with the two of us, where the two of us are always in the same room. So that's really worked out well. But the long form, has really let us get there, because sometimes it takes some time to warm up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the guest isn't comfortable, even though they've agreed to come. You know, there's some stage fright that can happen. Mm-hmm. And really getting that message across with our show, that's like, we're never coming at you with an angle. There's no dirt. We just want to chat and get to know our neighbors. Like,
that's something that we haven't had to deal with. Like the guests that we've had on our show, we have chemistry already. Like I've known them, or Janine's known them. So we haven't had
you've done most of the interviewing. Like, I think that's why it's so neat how many different things you can do with podcasts. Mm-hmm. But like when Vince is interviewing someone, he was doing most of the interviewing for this one, and I would never have met, in some cases, the person, which made it interesting, because I always ended up really liking them by the end of it, even though I'd never met them. Yeah. And that's when I knew that the interview was coming off properly, because it's like, I really like this guy.
But as of yet, I have not interviewed a complete stranger, which you guys have.
We have.
Because just the nature of your show. So we had like that chemistry going on our side. Yeah. So I haven't, and that'll be that'll be something new for me to tackle later on, because that's different. If I were to interview somebody who's really nervous, never been on not used to like hearing the sound of their own voice and having the stakes of that would be a different experience altogether.
Do you guys, is that patience? Like you let it run until the person gets comfortable?
Yeah. As soon as you start talking and you get an idea of the story that they want to tell, we just listen and kind of follow their lead. I always think it's you two today who are kind of driving this little boat here, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're intuitive and you just listen, you get an idea of what they want to talk about. I never want to be in a situation again as I was. So going back several years, I used to write for a big rock magazine in the U.S. And I was interviewing a professional wrestler who also had a rock band. And I told my editor, I just want to talk about the rock and roll, right? In the same way I once interviewed Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins. And all we talked about was about wrestling for an hour.
That's right. He loves wrestling.
Yeah. And he loved that interview. He said, I can't believe it. He goes, you're not going to ask me a single question about Pumpkins? I said, no. He said, perfect, right? And so anyways, but what happened was my editor, just minutes before this interview with this wrestler, he said, be sure to ask him about what happened in Brazil last week at that wrestling event, right? And I said, I don't want to ask him about that, right? And he said, no, you need to ask him that question, right? So me and this wrestler talked for 45 minutes about music. We talked about our shared love of Iron Maiden and Judas Priest and Ozzy Osbourne and his rock band. I knew all those records. We talked about all the songs, and we're getting near the end. I said, hey, can I ask you about that incident last week in Brazil, right? The whole mood changed.
Yeah.
It was that interview was over.
Oh,
He gave me an answer in a completely different voice. It sounded like a different person.
Yeah.
You lost him.
And we never got back. Like, I tried to come back to his tour. It was over.
So
and
he felt probably like he was fooled in a way, right?
Exactly.
And he'd been asked that a million times before.
I felt awful. Yeah, he probably was asked a million times that week.
Yeah.
And even though we always say the golden rule of podcasting is consistency, I think it is control your content.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope I'm never in a situation like that where I have an editor who's telling me you have to ask this question. Because I love Bonn Park podcast because we control the content.
Yeah. That makes
And those are
sense.
some of the best interviews ever are when you hear someone just talking and not answering the stock questions that you know are going to be asked about the things you know they're going to be asked about. I love them so much better when I get a little bit more insight into, the person part of the person.
Me too. We mentioned George Strombolopoulos earlier, but I'll watch him interview Blue Rodeo, and Greg Killer and Jim Cuddy, I think, are answering questions that are not usually asked. They're so well thought out and crafted.
That sense, and I think you know how to do it when you get to that point with the person where it's not feeling like an interview, it's feeling like a conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think what has happened here with both you and Vincent and then me and Sara is you see how you build up this rapport and this creative collaboration, and then those skills transfer over to something else. So I'm not remotely surprised that Sara and I, after all this time doing a podcast, can also work on a film together.
Yeah,
it's we can do like a blog of photography together. It's actually, there's many things that can probably just keep opening doors.
Absolutely.
And I guess that's what you found with yourselves, right?
Absolutely.
And how that relationship between your visual art and all of Janine's skills, whether it's sound or editing and
I think, but for us, it was just, I think that started with the band, and we've like played with short film together. We've played with games together. The music and the sound was always the lead way, even for the podcast too. Even though we knew it was going to be, it was about the content and the story that we could weave. The sounds are part of all of that. So I think that's for our story. That's the working together as a band is where we developed our Swiss Army knife tools.
Yeah, that always sort of gives us that's the glue, I think, between us. And the podcast is not really overtly about the band, but we knew that we wanted to finish it with a song, and we just wanted to find a way to make that work.
And I feel like the song at the end of the Strange Muses episodes is like a little treat for me. I'm like, oh, now I get to hear the song and put it all together. So it's like working.
Cool, that's exactly what we were intending.
But when you're talking about the relationship in music, like there is so much trust when you're in a band with someone. There is some just stick with me here and tell me if I'm right or wrong. Marshall was talking about intimacy earlier. And when you're in a band together, there's eye contact and body movements and signals that you're giving each other that are incredibly intimate. This connection that you have together where you have to signal each other for the next move or what's happening, or is this working for you, or is it my turn, or what's happening here, right? Like there's so much there that has to be shared that you're going to build a level of trust that you can then kind of work on anything together, right?
Yeah, and that's just in the live performance realm of it. A lot of what we do, especially lately, has been just production,
like postal service style kind of thing, where you're sharing bits.
Well, I mean, no matter what, when you're making music, you're spending a lot of time in the studio, and you're doing things track by track, and even then, that means you're still doing really intimate things in front of each other. Like you're going to hear me sing this song with no reverb on my voice and completely bare
stuff.
And you have to, it's almost like being comfortable enough to be naked in front of each other, and you get there, and another little part of how you can, if you can do that, you can probably work together on anything.
I'm blown away how after so much time working together, Sara and I could be talking to one person, and if you were to film it, I don't think it would be able to pick up and detect that there was communication happening. But Sara can do the most subtle, slightest thing with her eyes. It might just even be moving her eyes towards mine for a split second, then moving away. But something has been communicated there that we then talk about later. And we know what that was. We heard something, somebody said something that was resonating. And that's an incredible human thing that can happen
to get there. Yeah.
Anyways, before something that subtle can happen when it comes to body language and communication with eyes, a lot has had to lead up to that point. And I'm sure at some point you and Janine discovered that as well, that there's a comfort level that just somewhere happens.
Yeah, to add to that, for us anyway, like being in a band for years and years and years, like I think we're gonna have our 20th soon.
Congrats.
At the early part of those years, your egos, you're like, and not just the two of us, but the egos of the band members get to wrestle and like fight, and that's gone now. So and if you're still around to work together, you now know exactly who the person is, where they're coming from. And when you've exercised all those demons, it really is a great way to work together.
Yeah, because like the signals, I don't think we have the same, we haven't done so many interviews as you have. We don't have visual signals, but we pretty much know how each other think. So I think there's a lot of ESP, but also I think it's like getting to the point of maturity where we're just so sure that we both want to make the highest quality thing we're capable of. And that's all that matters. Mm-hmm. In the end, the arguments are just so much less charged than they were when we were,
even if 20. Like if I say I don't like that, or you say that, there's
nobody's going to take it personally.
Like, we're just like just look at it from another point of view.
Bonn Park is made possible with the support of the Kitchener Public Library and the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation.
Our show is produced by Sara Geidlinger
and Marshall Ward,
with audio engineering by Sara Geidlinger.
Bonn Park's original music is by Alan Lung. Harry, still with us? We want to tell you about a fun project that we have. Are you ready?
Yeah.
We have another podcast called An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. Here's Colin Hunter of Kayfabe News to tell you all about it.
Welcome to An Unscripted Spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling. I'm Colin Hunter from Kayfabe News. Marshall is utterly obsessed with professional wrestling. Sara is utterly perplexed by professional wrestling. On each episode of An Unscripted Spectacle, Marshall and Sara talk with a different guest from the world of wrestling. Promoters, referees, journalists, and current and past stars of the Squared Circle to talk deeply about the strange magic of professional wrestling that has enchanted Marshall his whole life. Can they turn Sara into a fellow connoisseur of professional wrestling? She'll need some convincing.
I find out who Jimmy Corderas is. Who the heck are you?
Oh, well, that's a good question. For those who don't know, I spent the better part of over 2 decades working in WWF/WWE, mostly as a referee inside the ring.
I have the honor of meeting the magnificent Lufisto.
I heard that you were described as the first lady of hardcore. I've just recently found out what hardcore is.
Yeah, thanks to Madman Pondo.
Thanks to Madman Pondo.
When I've learned that I was going to be inducted, it was like, it is now my time to tell the story of women's wrestling. Because so many times I've heard, oh, this is the first time this happens in women's wrestling history. And I'm like, no.
I learned all about the storytelling and writing process from Tom Casiello.
Yeah, I was in soap operas for 14 years. I was at Young and the Restless last. That was from 2009 to 2011. And so I thought, I'll go in for the interview. I'll be honest with them. If I blow it, I blow it. Not the end of the world. And I was there for 6 years. And I rose up the ranks to managing lead writer. And it was the most insane time period of my entire life.
I got a new skincare regime from RJ City.
Checking out your hair, and I wish that mine looked like yours. You have beautiful locks.
Thank you. The secret, this isn't a plug, it feels like an endorsement, is aloe vera. I have it here. I put it on my skin. I put it in my hair. I use the gel. I put a couple drops of peppermint in.
I have a plant right there on my
Good.
fridge.
Cut it open, squeeze it out, and put it, honestly, wherever you want. It's good for you.
I find out that Colt Cabana is just famous enough that he can still buy groceries. And Tyson Kidd tells me all about the people's elbow. Who knew?
Basically comes to a complete stop, then brings his leg over the guy like he's going to do a leg drop. but the leg like keeps circling past the guy, and then he drops an elbow on the guy.
Oh, and the elbow represents like all the people of the fans.
That's
like he's been voted. He's gonna drop this elbow.
Well, he started calling himself the People's Champion, and then that move just became the People's Elbow.
And then there's also, as you know, there's the People's Strudel.
Yeah. I mean, there's the People's Eyebrow. There's a lot of the people. Got a lot of people.
So check out an unscripted spectacle, Wrestling with Wrestling, available anywhere you get your podcasts.